Can you describe the tunnel for me?
The tunnel was started in a hut under a heater. The heater was a square job on a concrete platform. You could wriggle it aside, and we did this and then dug down and gradually got rid of the soil. And that was the one tunnel, but the main tunnel we had started under a separate hut in the camp. It was I don't know why the hut, this building was where it was. It was in isolation, and it was known as the education hut, where they used to have, where you could have lectures and the people could study for different subjects, and some of them did some quite intense study. They had lecture books sent in through the Red Cross and so on. They were doing law and sciences and so on. And I know I got involved. I used to do a bit of shorthand, and I did a bit of shorthand lecturing and bookkeeping and stuff like that from my days in high school and so on. And this hut was built up about that high from the ground. You had to step up to get into the hut. And the bottom of the hut was open. It had a few slats around, and we asked the Germans, when I say we, someone on the escape committee asked the Germans whether we could close that in, the bottom, so nobody could see in. And they said, why do you want that? And they said, well, we play a few ball games, and we had a ping pong table and some balls, and they get under the hut now and again and they get lost, and you know, you can't just go out and buy another one. So they said, well, yeah, you can do that. So they closed that in all around, and they used timber from our beds, the slats, closed it in all around, and then they had an opening under the heater in there, and they dug down, and it was easy to dispose of the soil. They could just put it under the hut, and they worked out that the hut would more than take all of the soil. So that part for us was easy, whereas in the Great Escape in Harry, they had to take it out and disperse it in the camp. The people had sacks inside their trouser legs, and they'd be filled with soil, and they'd be walking along. They had strings on the bottom of these, and they had their hands in their pockets, and as they walked along, they'd pull a string, and the soil would just trickle out as they walked along. And we didn't have to do that because we could stack it under this hut. And the hut had to go down about 6 to 8 feet down to get away from the German people who were, they had what we call ferrets, people who were German army lads who were, or Air Force fellows who were, it was their job to try and find tunnels. So you had to have it down a fair way so any movement or noise you made down there wouldn't be transmitted up, and also far enough down so it wouldn't cave in. And we had some quite ingenious inventions there made in the camp to, you burrowed so far in the tunnel and you were short of air, fresh air. So one of our chaps who lived not far from here invented with one of our sausage bags, the bags that we were issued with when you went away to put your gear in, he made a pair of bellows and a pump out of one of those, and they had a hose going through, and that would go down to the fellow working at the face of the tunnel, and they'd be pumping air down to him through this homemade system. In the tunnel building the tunnel, every now and again they'd come along to you and say, I want another 2 bedboards off you. And some of the people didn't know what they were for. I mean, unless you needed to know, you weren't told anything. Unless you were involved in a committee, escape committee, for security purposes, you weren't told anything. So finally we finished up sleeping on about 5 bedboards, one for the feet, one for the bottom, and one for the shoulders, might be another one in between. You were perched on about, it wasn't very comfortable, and there was not much padding on top of those. So anyway, that's where the bedboards were going. And
how many of you were on the escape committee?
there wouldn't have been more than about 10 or 12. They were kept very small for obvious reasons, that of security again. Anyone who wanted to escape, if they wanted assistance from the camp, from the escape committee, they had to submit a plan to the escape committee. And if the escape committee thought that plan was not practical, they would scrub it. They'd say, well, we don't want you to go, but if you go, we can't say don't go, but we don't want you to go because if you get a lot of people breaking out, it wasn't all that hard to get out of the camp. You'd get shot at and so on. You had to take these risks, but well, they were risks you took. But they didn't want too many people milling around outside and a lot of Jerrys hunting for them, because a genuine escaper would then have to get through that extra cordon to get away. So, and where we were, it was bad enough. The camp, we hadn't mentioned this before, but Stalag 4B was 70 miles due south of Berlin on the River Elbe. And all around us were camps. Would have been about 20 or 30 camps within about a 40-mile radius. So you had to get away from all that. And on top of that, if you agitated the Jerrys and they started milling around, well, you had chaos and it was hopeless. So
well, that's an interesting point. Given the location of your camp and that you'd heard of the results of the Great Escape, why were you so determined to still...
Look, the will to want to escape was so strong in most people that you just couldn't control it. You wanted to get away. There were people who just sat on their butts from the day they got in to the day they left. They said, well, blow this, I'm here. I didn't want to be here. Now I'm going to sit here until they come and get me. There were those sort of people, but then there were others who couldn't do that. They would go crazy if they, and I was one of those who just couldn't bear to just sit there. Let's annoy them and cause havoc. And there were lots of things you could do. We learned how to black out the whole camp during an air raid. It was blacked out anyway, but you would fuse the electrical system so that their searchlights out on the search towers would not operate. And then when they went to switch on the lights after, there was nothing. They would then have to go and find out where the damage was and repair it. Things like that. Some of them, it didn't help you to get away, but it inconvenienced the Jerry war effort. There were many ways there were different ways you could get away. And let me just say this, that escaping was no sport. In fact, Jerry wrote a bit of a poster. He said, escaping is no sport, you will be shot. And that was so. If they caught you and under the right circumstances, they'd just shoot you. They wouldn't ask 2 questions. They always had right on their side. He was trying to get away or trying to molest me or do this or that. So I shot him. And even when people were taken away from the camp to go on trial, we were tried in army courts of law, supposed to be, and they would take away to Leipzig from where we were, and on the way they would have you in a car, and on the way they would say, well, would you like to go out for a comfort stop? Get out in the trees over there. And if you hadn't been warned and you got out and you went to walk over there, they'd just shoot you in the back. You were escaping. You were walking away from them, but at their suggestion, these sort of things.
Well, just going back to the escape committee, you mentioned that there was about 10 of you. It was a small committee. Who was doing the digging?
Oh, there were different people doing the digging. Then the escape committee was just a committee of so-called experts, people who there were people who could copy documents, forge signatures, tailors, linguists, passport people. These sort of people were on committees. And I was involved in that. I spent some time in the Camp Lazarette, which was outside the prison camp in the German area. I was there for about 6 weeks. I was pretty sick. And while I was there, I palled up with a little German guard, and I got him to buy a radio for us. And he got the radio, and the way to get it into the camp, we got permission from the Germans to buy a drum, a big bass drum, and we had the radio put inside the drum, and the drum was carried into the camp, and the radio was inside the drum. So that was just one little way of helping the escape committee. We had other radios in the camp, and some were made in the camp, manufactured. We had our own BBC News each night. The BBC News would come on about 7 o'clock. We wouldn't hear it. It would be on a secret radio somewhere. We'd be taken down in shorthand, and then the reader would be snuck from one hut to the next, and they'd come in and there'd be someone to sing out, "News up," and everybody be quiet. The BBC News was read out, and the fellow would disappear off to the next hut. And that's how we kept up with the news. And the Germans they thought they were being smart, they had on the wall a large map of the two fronts. After D-Day on the 6th of June in 1944, there was the Western Front, and then there was the Eastern Front. And the Germans had a red ribbon down where the Eastern Front actually was supposed to be, where they wanted us to believe it was supposed to be. But we would go along, and from our own news, we would go and alter the pins on their map, and they would say next day, "Who did that?" We would say, "Well, we did, because that's where the true front is." They had a fair idea, but they never knew, or they had a shrewd idea how we got to know. They knew we had radios in the camp. You know, I will tell you a funny story on that. And we did the same with the Western Front. Every now and again, when the Germans brought a lot of coal bricks into the camp for the cookhouse, there'd be a yell go up in the camp, "Coal up!" and everyone would put their greatcoats on, and they would mooch along past the cookhouse where the trailers were with the briquettes on, and as you went past, you grabbed one in each hand and stuck them in your pocket. They were bricks about that long, and weighed about a pound, I suppose. And you'd amble back to the hut and stack them away. You'd do a circuit, you might do 3 or 4 like that. There'd be possibly more coal bricks finished up in the hut and in the cookhouse. And we knew the cookhouse had to be supplied because, you know, they had to cook the tucker, so they'd just have to go and get more coal. And we used to stack it up in the ceiling, and it had this matchboard ceiling. And they went to look for the radio in our camp. They would tip you out at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, any old time. They'd come and do a search of your hut. What are you looking for? We're looking for the radio, or we're looking for this or that. And this day, a couple of Germans got up in the ceiling. They were looking for the radio, and they came across this lot of coal stacked up there in Red Cross parcel boxes about that square. And the German stepped on the one beam near the stack of coal and was that much, weighed too much, and the whole damn lot just cascaded down. There must have been a couple of 3 ton of coal came cascading down, and the jerry in amongst it. There was not a word said about that. We were allowed to keep the coal, nothing was said. They weren't looking for coal, they were looking for a radio. And they were that single-minded that the coal wasn't a no-no. They forgot about that. It wasn't a radio, so they wouldn't touch the coal. They were looking for the radio. There was another tunnel in the compound, and the second tunnel was over in the French compound. And that was dug. I don't know who was working on that one. I have no idea. The first one I spoke about was mainly our Air Force people.
Before you go on, can I just clarify? I might have missed this. You might have already said it. But that first tunnel that we've been talking about, that wasn't under the heater in your actual hut, was it? That was in...
No, it was in this. It was under this education hut, which was standing alone. I'll show you afterwards on a diagram, standing alone in the compound. There was a large area in there which was vacant that was used for parades, and we could exercise and walk around.